Hello, my name is Hassan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast shorts. There's no co-host on these shorts episodes. These are now around 2 to 4 minute, sometimes as long as 6 to 10 minute observations, ideas, thoughts, or rants about the literature, philosophy, psychology, and even the theology of leadership. Because listening to me talk about leadership for now around 2 to 4 minutes is still better than reading and trying to understand yet another business book. Even that business book your coworker won't stop raving about because it quote-unquote changed their life, but you can't see any difference in their leadership behavior. So how good could that author be? Leaders must understand history. And one of the challenges of reaching the height of managerial culture in the 20th century was that American leaders began to view history through the lens of never-ending progressive expansion, or the J-curve, consistently going up and to the right. We can, perhaps in our time, lay such thinking at the feet of the baby boomer generation, those cohort of people who both served and died in Vietnam and were hippies and yuppies much later. Now that cohort of people is retired and moving on from the historical scene, and their influence is being debated, retconned, and critiqued by subsequent generations who grew up and lived in the backwash of their historical point of view, such never-ending progressive expansion is also up for critique. The idea that history is just a tale of never-ending progressive expansion runs counter to the view held throughout most of human history by most people in human history, that history itself runs inevitably and inexorably in cycles, and that those cycles match the seasons of agriculture as well as the seasons of life. Managerial culture, scientific materialism, and even mass religious movements run counter to this idea, particularly those of the 20th century, and reject it outright. Yet, these cycles still run our lives and are reflected in the pitiless considerations of nature and the sentience we ignore that stirs deep in our souls and rears its ugly head through our movies, music, and books, especially our science fiction books, particularly of the late 20th century, gives release to the unease of the 4 post-World War II generations who suspect, quite rightly, that maybe, just maybe, the cyclical model of history is not yet done with us. What does all of this have to do with leadership? Well, if history has cycles, and cycles are inevitable, woven into the fabric of reality, and if the hubris of managerial culture, scientific materialism, and even mass religious movements is to be rejected by future leaders, then a healthy consideration of the cycles of history and the consequences of rejecting the impact of those cycles is incumbent upon leaders who are walking around right now to acknowledge. Said another way, we need to get vacations to the moon for sure before the next historical cycle of chaos inevitably rolls over us in the West. And well, that's it for me. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast today. And now that you've made it this far, you should subscribe to the audio version of this show on all the major podcast players, including Apple iTunes, Spotify, YouTube Music, and everywhere else where podcasts are available. There's also a video version of our podcast on our YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the Leadership Toolbox channel on YouTube. Just search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button there on YouTube. And while you're doing that, leave a 5-star review if you like what we're doing here on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Just go below the player and hit 5 stars. We need those reviews to grow, and it's the easiest way to help grow this show. And tell all your friends, of course, in leadership. By the way, if you don't like what we're doing here, well, you can always listen to another leadership show. There are several other good ones out there. At least that's what I've heard. All right. Well, that's it for me.